Well, tonight it's official. We are having our first frost warning for 2022. So we've got to get a few things sorted before it gets dark. We're one step closer to winter making its arrival, and as many of you know, we still have a lot of stuff in the garden. Now, not everything in this threat of frost needs to be dealt with tonight, but there's definitely a few things, like some of the more tender plants, like these scarlet runner beans, that we basically need to get out and sort some things out, whether we're protecting or whether we're harvesting. So now's the scramble to do that before it's dark. So beans are number one. We still have quite a few beans that are green. As you can see, some of these scarlet runner beans are too big, i.e. we're going to leave them and just see what happens. But you can already see there we have some that are starting to dry and turn. So we are going to go along and pick off some of the smaller, more tender ones. But a couple of our bean varieties are still pretty loaded.
Some of the things, like some of our basil here, we're just going to chop it and take it in and see what we can kind of get off of this to dehydrate. We've got some here that we were trying to let go to seed, but I think we're going to lose it anyways, even if we try and leave it. So we're just going to take all of this off, basically right down. This plant is done for this season. Other things we have in this garden are lavender, which we're leaving because it is supposed to be cold hardy enough for our zone. We do have stevia as well, which we just planted out this season, and we're just covering with that with a pot for right now, but it won't actually last the winter. But we're hoping with the pot and maybe a little blanket over top, we will be fine until the next 2 nights are over, because we're supposed to have 2 cold nights and then it's supposed to be nice again.
And these are our zinc beans, which are a new pole bean variety for us. We've already harvested quite a few dry beans, but we found out that they're actually pretty good as green beans.
They're delicious, and even when they get bigger,
they're still pretty decent. Really
nice, not stringy at all. So really excited about these ones. This was a new one for us to try this year and super pleased with it. Definitely going in the repertoire.
So we'll see what we can get off that won't ripen for seed and add it to the bucket. So as we mentioned, kind of scanning across the garden here, there's quite a few things that we're not going to worry about because a little bit of frost won't hurt them. These are our red mangels, or red mango beets. We're basically not going to save any tomatoes. They're pretty much done, and we're not going to rip them out tonight, but they're probably going to come out in the very near future. So it's going to be what it's going to be. That's the gambling of growing sort of late into the season. Even though this row of peppers look amazing, we're actually going to just harvest everything that we can find, red or green, and leave them to their fate, because there's really not a lot left that's likely to make it even if we do cover it.
These are the bullnose peppers.
We're going to get in here and get those peppers out. Well, we're working our way through the beans at the moment, but one thing I will mention right now that's a really big plus for us with the pole beans is we're getting frost. We've had some wet weather, but even though they're not all dry, as you can see from these ones, they're not all dry, but because they're up and they're off the ground, even if they get frosted and the plant basically dies, a lot of these are to that point now that they'll still dry and they'll still be edible because they just haven't quite turned. But huge plus in our opinion for having pole beans of any variety, because at least for where we live, you're likely to actually get something versus some of the bush beans.
We also do need to harvest our potatoes, but not a priority for tonight. They can handle a bit of the frost. As you can see, our vegetation on these is starting to die back quite a bit. We're even getting a few of them starting to pop out of the ground, but we're not worried. So we've got a whole bunch there. And between the peppers and these peas is another double row. So we've got a lot of potatoes to harvest in this next little bit.
Well, our squash took a bit of a beating this year. But if we're getting down below 0 tonight with a frost warning, there's a good chance a lot of this won't make it super well. So I'm going to try and find as many squash as I can in here.
Basically this is what, 15 by 20 foot space filled with sweet Italian frying peppers. We love these Tolli's peppers. You honestly wouldn't believe how much these guys produce. As you can see here, we have tons and tons and tons of green peppers still on here, and these should turn red. Now, the nice thing is they are edible green as well, but we would really prefer to give them a chance to turn red. So I'm going to pick anything off of these that I can find that's starting to turn, and then we're going to get them covered for the night with some blankets and hope that that gives them a little bit of a surviving chance for all the hundreds of peppers that are still on these plants. So basically, in the hopes of being able to cover these with the sheets and keep some of this alive, these taller guys, I don't know if you can see that, but it really is a height one compared to some of the others. I'm just going in here and I'm breaking out the tops so that we just have kind of a nice light short cover that I can just lay the sheets over top. It kind of exposes some of the peppers, but it will make the sheets work a lot better. So we're at this point, anything that survives this frost is just going to be a bonus item. We are picking any of the substantial size green ones as well, because these do taste good green and they will ripen if you keep them inside, but we're going to pick what we can get. Well, I ended up with half a 5-gallon bucket that I figured was worth picking, but everything else we've covered with sheets. One thing I wanted to note was that if you are going to be covering stuff when there's a frost risk, you need to make sure you get these covered before they get damp in the evening. Once that dampness is under, it doesn't matter if you put those sheets on top, it's still going to frost underneath and freeze. Now, I sort of feel that you're even better if you can keep the sheets elevated off the plant. We don't have a setup for that, so we're just kind of chancing it here that the foliage is going to help protect some of the foliage and fruit underneath. But I see one there that I should pick because it's not underneath the thing. So we'll take that one too.
Well, in the end, as you can kind of see behind me here, made the decision to just sort of rip out all the vines and whatnot that were out in the open. Now, I'll show you what I've harvested so far. We've already done a little bit of a harvest of some stuff that was hanging on the fences a few days ago, so that's not in there. But I may not, you can kind of see behind, where the foliage is denser for tonight, because this is the first frost and it's probably going to be a light one. I'm not going to worry about that because I don't think anything will get hit. If I can't see it, the frost isn't going to sit on it. So I'm going to go with that anyways, and we'll see how that works tomorrow morning.
As you can see, we have a lot of cold hardy plants here that we're not too worried about. We've got turnips, beets, even our lettuce. Those are products that really don't mind this kind of temperature, and we know they're going to bounce back after this frost. Even our sad cabbages here, which we know are not going to amount to anything for human food, but we're hoping will develop into a little bit of rabbit food at least for this season. But we're not going to worry too much about those because they can handle it. Even our parsley. I did pick that one because I wanted to get some of it dried the other day, but I have another big batch of parsley down here, and that is going to be just fine. It can handle this, as I'd said. I'm not even going to bother to cover that. I am, however, going to throw a blanket or sheet here over top of my basil that's going to seed. This is from our own basil seed. I'm not ready to harvest this yet and bring it in, but I am going to make sure it's covered because I still would like it, and I definitely want to collect those seeds. And our other patch of basil over here also will get covered. I'm going to maybe pick some off of this to throw into the dehydrator tonight, but there'll still be some plants left that I'd like to keep going, so we're going to get them covered. And once again, we're doing this before it's gotten too damp and cold, so they should be just fine for tomorrow. But
well, that is basically the bulk of our squash harvest for this year. Now, I do have a few squash that I picked the other day that were kind of up really in the open. And so by weight, this is probably half. We haven't weighed anything yet. But unlike last year, this is not an epic garden harvest. But it is what it is. Despite the setbacks, we still have squash. And I think that's a good point, though, to mention is, or to reiterate, I guess, is we did have some pretty significant setbacks on the squash front this year. And we still managed to produce a fair bit of food. It looks like nothing compared to last year, but that'll still be pretty good. So yeah, it is what it is. I think that's one of the parts of homesteading. It's very difficult to actually produce a huge volume of everything every year, i.e. don't put all your eggs in one basket, because you know not everything's going to produce as well as you'd like. But we still have some other harvests after we get through this cold snap, so stay tuned. But pretty much wrapped into this video, that's the bulk of our squash harvest for 2022. Well, we got our very first frost of 2022. As you can see on these kale plants, it was a pretty good frost for the first frost. Usually we get kind of a light sort of, it's questionable whether you actually had any freezing, but last night it definitely decided to change from sort of late summer conditions, which I know we're in October, but to fall. So it is official. The bulk of gardening season is over, but obviously these kale plants will be completely fine and still productive probably for a little bit now, at least another month. But not everything fared so well. These beans, it's a good thing we collected the green beans yesterday, because they won't bounce back from this. This will be it for them. Not cold hardy, but that's okay. We had a good run with them, and it happens every year. A lot of these plants will bounce back. These are rutabaga plants. This shouldn't be enough to really kill them back. The bok choy should be okay. The peppers next to it, those will probably melt, even though they kind of look pretty and frozen at the moment. By the time the sun hits them midday, they'll thaw out and kind of go to mush. So we'll be pulling those plants out of the garden here in the very near future. It's really good that we did get out and harvest and cover some stuff, because as you can see from the blankets behind me, if we hadn't have, we would have lost it. So I think that's always one of the things about gardening, where you're kind of fighting that or tempting fate a little bit on the end of the season, because sometimes we don't get a really good sort of killing frost. Well, I'm not sure if this is a completely killing frost, but a heavier frost like this, it can be into October. We've even had it where it's not until November. But 2022, this is definitely feeling like a bit more of a normal sort of fall progression. I can hear lots of fall migrants, rusty blackbirds, dark-eyed juncos. They've already arrived, and now we have our frost. So stay tuned, because from here on out, it'll be sort of the moving towards cleaning the garden out and getting some of these more cold hardy plants out and preserved.